Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Z Mount 20mm f1.8 and we're going to be comparing that against the F Mount 20mm 1.8. So I have had the chance to spend a lot more time with this lens, really get to understand what it performs well at, what it doesn't perform well at, and one of the first things that I wanted to do was to compare how well this lens looks versus against kind of the F mount in terms of sharpness, detail, resolution. And one of the things that a lot of people asked about was sunstars, so we're also going to take a look at that as well between the two lenses. I've used it for a range of different things, everything from kind of interior architecture stuff to landscape photography as well, long exposures without filters. Works wonderfully well with my filter holders that I use as well, so I've been impressed so far. What I will be doing is I'll be doing a separate video against the 14-30 to see if it replaces my kind of go-to landscape lens, so keep an eye out for that. But in this video we're just going to be talking about the difference between the Z Mount 20mm 1.8 and the F Mount 20mm 1.8, just to see what the difference is between those two. So I have done a range of comparison shots where we'll be able to compare the lenses side by side. As with all of my comparison videos, I'm just going to show you what the lenses produce. It's entirely up to you to kind of make your own decision, your own choices about what you see in front of you. If you agree with my kind of thoughts and feelings, that's great. If not, that's great too. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I just want to show you what the lenses look like. So that's what we'll go do now. We'll have a look at some of the shots side by side.
Right, so what we have here is the Z Mount 20mm f1.8 on the left, and then we have the F Mount 20mm 1.8 on the right. Both of them are at 1.8, both of them are using the same shutter speed, 125th of a second, both at the same ISO, both on the same camera. Obviously the F Mount is using an FTZ adapter on a Z7. We have proven that in previous videos the FTZ adapter does not make a difference to picture quality, so the only thing that should be making the differences in picture quality here is the lens itself. There's no other variable in this test. So Z mount on the left, F mount on the right. So let's go take a look at these lenses both wide open, see if there's any major differences we can see. So here we are at 1:1 and we can see the sharpness difference already. The Z mount lens on the left hand side is just sharper. The 20mm is still sharp, but you can see it's just losing detail. It does have an issue with a bit of ghosting, bit of chromatic aberration as well. It just appears that the Z mount lens when wide open is a lot sharper and a lot more well controlled. Even if we look at these tiny detailed areas here, we can just see that the 20mm lens is just going to give you a sharper, better quality image. If we check the corners, you can see that the Z mount still retains a lot of sharpness and detail even right in the corner of the frame. The F mount still doesn't really lose any detail from its center. It's just obviously not as sharp as the Z mount 20mm lens in the corners. This is nothing surprising really. Those of you that have been watching my videos for a while now, this is something that I've kind of come to expect. The Z mount lens has generally always outperformed the F mount lens. So this is kind of what I expected. It's nothing really surprising. That Z mount lens is just designed to be better when wide open. So not that we really need to, but we are going to look at 2:1. So here we are at 2:1, and again the Z mount lens is just significantly sharper. I wouldn't say that it's the sharpest Z mount lens, so it doesn't definitely look as sharp as a 50mm maybe. What I'll have to do is do a Z 20mm versus the Z 24mm to see how sharp this lens is compared to other Z mount lenses. For now, compared to the F mount lens, it's obviously significantly better. Some of you at this point might want to say, oh well, the F mount lens might have been misfocused or something like that, and that's definitely not the case. I take multiple shots of each individual setup and I always choose the best shot out of all of those shots. If it was missed focus, I would have picked that up and would have made sure that that wasn't the case. So this is exactly what you're going to get in terms of the difference between these two lenses. Also at 2:1 we can see that ghosting having much more of an effect on the detail and the sharpness in these areas here. So at f1.8, the Z mount lens is just the better lens, as we kind of expected. Again, even in the corners, so we are here in the corners at 2:1, and we can see that the detail and sharpness that's just retained in the Z mount is unbelievably good compared to the F mount lens. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the lenses down, and let's see if the F mount 20mm improves. Right, so now we have both lenses stopped down at f4. On the left, again, we have the Z mount 20mm 1.8, and then on the right, we have the F mount 20mm 1.8, both at f4. There is a slight difference in shutter speed. One of the things I noticed is that the Z mount lens was taking in slightly more light. So I was going by the camera's metering system, and the camera telling me what the correct shutter speed should be to give me a correct exposure, and it just so happened that when I used the F mount lens, that gave me a 25th of a second, and when I used the Z mount lens, it gave me a 30th of a second. Not that it makes a massive difference in this test anyway, as the camera's on a tripod. Same ISO. We're here at 1:1, and the good thing is that the F mount lens is really sharpened up. Quite clearly, stopping that lens down when it's wide open at 1.8, it's not the sharpest lens in the world, but now we've stopped that down to f4, it's really sharpened up, so much so that here at 1:1, it's hard to see any real differences between them. There is still ghosting in the depth of field. We can see that the depth of field is just not as well controlled as it is in the Z mount lens. So to see any real difference at 1:1, we do have to move just slightly off center. So as we move across here, you can see that the Z mount lens is just retaining sharpness, whereas the F mount lens is just getting a little bit softer and softer the more you move away from the center. So we'll just have a quick look at 2:1. So here we are at 2:1, and yeah, it is very difficult to see the difference between these two. I'm going to say, because obviously I'm seeing the images right in front of me without the YouTube compression and all that type of stuff, I'm going to say that it ever so slightly goes to the Z mount lens, but in real world situations, you're probably not going to see that difference. You can see that as we move away from the center, the Z mount lens, again, as I mentioned, just retaining that sharpness, whereas the F mount lens is just getting softer and softer. Again, here we can see the Z mount lens is just retaining that detail in the corners, whereas the F mount lens is not. Right, so here we are, both lenses stopped down to f8. Z mount on the left and F mount on the right. So let's go take a look, see if we can notice any differences. So at 1:1, again, as we would have expected, the same as it was at f4, it's hard to see the differences between them at 1:1. So those of you that are really interested in kind of real world situations, at the center of the frame at least, there's not much difference between the two. However, that does change when we start to move towards the edges of the frame. So as we start to move further away, we can see that the F mount lens just gets softer and softer the further we move away, whereas the Z mount lens is just sharp from corner to corner. So if we look in this corner of the frame here, we can see that the Z mount lens is just a lot sharper all round, whereas the F mount lens is just getting much softer in the corners. So right in those extreme corners, the F mount 20mm lens does start to lose its sharpness. It's just not as pin sharp. And that's just one of the things that we've kind of come to expect as well. So f8 here, so it's still within the depth of field, but we are just losing sharpness because it's in the corner of the frame, whereas the Z mount lens is performing fantastically well in the corners, even visible at 1:1. So if we quickly have a look at 2:1, so here we are at 2:1, and again at the center of the frame, it's really hard to see between them really. They're both really nice and sharp at the center, but as soon as we start to move towards the edges, that 20mm just starts to get softer and softer and softer. And so if we check the extreme kind of corner, so you can really see here how much sharper the Z mount is in the corner of the frame versus the F mount lens. Both at f8, remember, we're looking at 2:1 here. The Z mount lens is just significantly sharper than the F mount lens in the corner of the frame, but in the middle of the frame, they are very similar. So corner sharpnesses, if that's important to you, that's where the Z mount lens is going to be much better. Right, so here we are, both lenses now at f11. Again, Z mount on the left, F mount on the right, just in case you'd forgot by now. So, again, at 1:1, at the middle of the frame, again, it's hard to tell the difference between the two. They're equally as sharp as each other in the middle of the frame, but as soon as we start to move away from the middle, that's when the differences start to creep in. Again, the F mount lens is just getting softer towards the edges, especially when we look at this edge in the corner down here. So you can just see down here at 1:1, the F mount lens is just softer than the Z mount lens is. And again, it's just that Z mount lens being sharper across the frame, sharper in the corners. If you're only ever worried about the center of the frame, the F mount lens is going to be perfect. But if you are concerned about those corners, making sure those corners are as sharp as possible, that's where the Z mount lens is going to come in as well. So we'll take a quick look at 2:1. And again, in the center of the frame, it's really difficult to tell the difference. Ever so slightly softer maybe on the F mount lens here, but we're really kind of picking hairs here. In a real world environment at the center of the frame, you're not going to notice the difference between the two. But as we mentioned, as soon as we start to move away from the center, we can start to see already here the Z mount lens is sharper here than the F mount lens is, more detailed. You can see here now we've got to the corner, the Z mount lens is just much sharper than the F mount lens is. There's just no comparison really when it comes to those edges, when it comes to those corners. We can see here how much sharper the Z mount lens is in the corner of the frame compared to the F mount lens. Remember here, they're both at f11, so it's not like they're outside of the depth of field. Right, well, one of the things that a lot of people asked to see were comparisons for sunstars between both the 20mm lenses, because the F mount 20mm lens is kind of known for giving you pretty good sunstar effects. Now, in all honesty, this is not something I would normally shoot. I don't ever shoot above f11. So these examples are not going to be the best examples, unfortunately. And with the current situation about going outdoors and things like that, these aren't the best examples in the world, but I hope that for some of you they are enough of an insight to give you an idea of the differences between the two lenses. So here we have the Z mount 20mm on the left hand side and the F mount 20mm on the right hand side. Both are at f16. One thing to note that the Z mount 20mm does not have the new Arneo coating that you have seen in the 24mm and in the 14 to 30mm lens, and I think that is a consideration for people wanting to use this lens for sunstars and that type of effect. So obviously ignore the little dust spots on here. I forgot to be in the front of the lens. So Z mount on the left, F mount on the right. So here we are again, Z mount on the left, F mount 20mm on the right, both at f16. These images are straight out of camera. I have taken the highlights down ever so slightly, but other than that, I've not changed anything else. This is how I shot them. So another example here, just with a smaller light source, with a street light this time, rather than when we're using the sun, for example. Again, Z mount on the left, F mount on the right, and both at f16. Because it's obviously taken at night, and it's a little bit more noisy because of the higher ISO that I need to use to take it at night, but hopefully still gives you a good example of kind of the sunstars that you're expected to get from these two lenses. As I mentioned, this isn't something that I generally have any preference on whatsoever. It's not something I have a lot in my pictures.
Right, well, thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope that you found it useful. If you do have any questions about this 20mm lens in particular, then please do pop them in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.